The wind in Wyoming never truly sleeps. It is a restless, ancient thing that knows no mercy. It howls across the high plains of Laramie like a lonely ghost seeking a home. In the year 1888, that wind felt like a physical weight on Evelyn's tired shoulders. It was late November, when autumn dust could turn to winter snow without warning. The wind pulled at her hair. It bit into her skin with the teeth of coming ice. She stood at the edge of the dusty wagon road, watching the horizon. She clutched a small wooden crate against her chest. The wood was rough and cold. The edges were splintered from years of travel. Inside were her only earthly belongings. She had a few rusted needles. She had several spools of faded thread. She had a family Bible with a worn leather cover and gold leaf pages. But her most precious possession was not in a crate. Lucy had grown too tired to walk, so Evelyn carried her close against her chest in a worn cloth sling. Little Lucy was only 4 years old, a tiny spark in a vast wilderness. She had golden curls that caught the morning light even in the dust. Her eyes were as blue as a clear summer sky over the Missouri River. Evelyn reached down with a trembling hand. She adjusted the heavy wool shawl around the girl's small shoulders. The fabric was thin and heavily patched. The winter of 1886 and 1887 had been a nightmare. People across the West would remember it as the Great Die-Up. The sky had turned white for months on end. At its worst, the temperature plunged to 40 below zero. The world became a tomb of ice and silence. Thousands of cattle had frozen where they stood. Their carcasses littered the plains like gray stones. The ranching empires of the West crumbled in a single brutal season. Families had been wiped out by the ice and the hunger. Evelyn was one of the lucky ones, or so she told herself. She had survived the cold and the starvation, but she was penniless and desperate.
She was alone in a hard, unforgiving land. She had come to this rugged territory for a reason. She was running from a past that burned like a hot coal in her heart. In the town of Laramie, she lived a quiet, invisible life. The locals knew her simply as the Widow Lane. It was a lie she told every single day. It was a necessary shield for a single mother. In the late 19th century, a woman alone was prey. Society was a judge with a heavy gavel. Respectability was her only armor against the world. She had spent the last 2 years in a small, leaking shack. The walls were thin and the mud chinking fell out during every storm. She sewed until her vision blurred and the candles guttered out. She sewed until her fingers bled and her knuckles swelled. The quiet pull of thread through cloth had become the only rhythm of her life. She mended the heavy, salt-stained trousers of miners. She repaired the delicate, expensive lace of the town's elite. Her back ached from the constant leaning. Her heart ached from the constant, crushing silence. Then a letter arrived with a heavy wax seal. The owner of the Blackwood Ranch needed a seamstress. It was the largest ranch in the county, a kingdom of grass and stone. The pay offered was more than she earned in 6 long months. It was a fortune to a woman with nothing left to lose. Evelyn knew she could not say no, despite the fear. She ignored the knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The ranch was miles away, in the deep, dangerous wilderness. She hired a rickety wagon and a tired, stubborn mule. They set out toward the jagged peaks of the Medicine Bow Mountains. The journey took 2 long, dusty days. The sun was a harsh, blinding eye in a cloudless sky. The sagebrush stretched out forever in every direction. Finally, the ranch house came into view. Evelyn's breath caught in her dry, parched throat. It was a massive structure of mountain stone and dark timber.
It stood tall and defiant against the Wyoming horizon. A large windmill spun slowly in the yard. Its rhythmic creaking sounded like a slow, steady heartbeat. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and expensive leather. The wagon came to a jarring, dusty halt. Evelyn climbed down from the seat. One arm remained tightened protectively around Lucy in the sling. Her boots sank into the dry, thirsty earth. The dust swirled around her ankles like a warning. She held the wooden crate with a white-knuckled grip. She felt a strange, cold sense of impending fate. On the wide porch, a man stood motionless. He was looking out over the vast, golden valley. He wore a wide-brimmed Stetson pushed back on his head. His vest was made of the finest dark calfskin. His silhouette was powerful and broad. He cast a long, intimidating shadow in the afternoon sun. The man turned around slowly. Evelyn felt the entire world tilt on its axis. The wooden crate in her hand slipped. It hit the dirt with a dull, hollow thud. Her needle scattered into the dust, lost forever. The man on the porch was not just a wealthy rancher. He was Garrett Thorne. He was her first love and her only love. She had not seen him for 5 agonizing years. Garrett froze at the sight of her. His hand tightened against the porch rail. His face was weathered by the harsh Wyoming sun. Deep lines were etched around his narrowed eyes. He looked older and harder than she remembered. He was far more imposing than the boy she knew in St. Louis. "Evelyn," he whispered. His voice sounded like gravel grinding on mountain stone. The name sounded like a prayer and a bitter curse. Evelyn could not find her voice. Her lungs felt like they were filled with thick, hot smoke. She saw the flash of recognition in his dark eyes. It was followed by a wave of intense, raw pain. Then his gaze shifted downward. He looked at the small child resting against her chest. His eyes lingered far longer than they should have. He searched her face as though trying to remember a forgotten dream. Then his gaze drifted back to Evelyn, back to the little girl with the golden curls. His breathing became uneven and shallow. Lucy woke and looked up at the tall, grim stranger. Her eyes were wide with innocent curiosity. Garrett stared at the little girl's face. Evelyn watched the exact moment he realized the truth. The girl had his strong, stubborn jawline. She had his distinctive, straight brow. She had that unmistakable spark in her blue gaze. The silence between them was deafening. It was louder than the howling Wyoming wind. It was a silence filled with 5 years of dead dreams. It was filled with 1,000 broken promises. "You are the seamstress," Garrett said. His voice regained its cold, distant authority. "I am," Evelyn managed to choke out. She shifted Lucy's weight, holding her closer. "Come inside," he commanded. He turned his back on her. He walked through the heavy, iron-bound doors. Evelyn wanted to run. She wanted to jump back in the wagon and disappear. But she had no money and no home to return to. She had a hungry child who needed a future. She picked up her crate.
She followed him into the lion's den. Every step across the polished floor felt heavier than the last. 5 years earlier, she had dreamed of walking beside Garrett as the woman he loved. Now she entered his home as a hired seamstress with a frightened little girl in her arms. She wondered whether fate was being cruel or merciful. She no longer knew the difference. Behind her, Lucy rested her small head against Evelyn's shoulder with complete trust. That simple trust gave Evelyn the strength to keep walking. If she had to face every ghost from her past to protect her daughter, then she would do it without turning back. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The interior of the house was magnificent and cold. It smelled of cedar wood and fresh beeswax. Fine rugs from the east covered the polished floors. They were a stark contrast to the dirt of the trail. Garrett led them to a large, sunlit sitting room. The fireplace was the size of a stagecoach. "Sit," he said. He gestured toward a velvet-covered chair. Evelyn sat on the very edge of the cushion. Her spine was as straight as a lodgepole pine. Lucy climbed out of the sling and into her lap. The girl buried her face in the crook of Evelyn's neck. "The girl's name?" Garrett asked. He stood by the window with his back to them. "Lucy," Evelyn replied. Her voice was thin and trembling. "How old is she?" Garrett asked. "She will be 5 in the spring," Evelyn said. Garrett closed his eyes tightly. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the windowsill. The math was simple and brutal. The conclusion was inescapable. He walked over to a mahogany sideboard. He poured himself a glass of amber whiskey.
"I searched for you, Evelyn," he said. He did not look at her while he spoke. "I searched every street in St. Louis for months." Evelyn felt a bitter, jagged laugh rise in her throat. "Your father told me you had gone to Europe," she said. "He said you were going to marry a wealthy debutante." Garrett turned sharply. His eyes were blazing with sudden, fierce anger. "And you believed the man?" he demanded. "You believed I would just walk away from you?" "I was a seamstress's daughter, Garrett," she reminded him. "Your father made it very clear what I was. He said I was a stain on your family's name." "He told me you had taken a settlement," Garrett countered. "He said you moved to Chicago to start a new life." The room felt smaller as the lies pressed in. They had both been pawns in a rich man's game. It was a game of pride and cold, calculating power. "I never took a single penny," Evelyn said. Her voice was rising with years of suppressed rage. "I left because your father threatened my mother. He was going to have her jailed on false charges. I had to protect her, Garrett. I had to protect myself from his reach." She did not mention the pregnancy yet. She did not tell him she knew within weeks of fleeing St. Louis. By then, she was already on a train heading west. She was terrified and broke. She was completely and utterly alone. Garrett took a long drink of the whiskey. His throat moved as he swallowed the fire. "And now you are here," he said softly. "Of all the ranches in this vast country."
You walk onto my porch on a Tuesday afternoon. "I didn't know it was yours," she insisted. "The letter only mentioned the Blackwood Ranch." "My mother's maiden name," Garrett explained. "I took it when I left the East forever. I wanted nothing to do with my father's money. I wanted nothing to do with his name or his lies." He looked at her then. He really looked at her for the first time. He saw the tattered, dusty hem of her dress. He saw the thick calluses on her small hands. He saw how thin and weary her frame had become. It broke his heart to see her this way. The vibrant girl he loved was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by hardship. "You will stay here," he said. It was more of a command than an invitation. "The house is large, and the work is plenty. The winter ball is in 3 weeks. The governor of Wyoming Territory will be attending. I need my staff to look the part. I want the best for my house." He hesitated on the last word. His eyes lingered on Lucy's sleeping form. Evelyn knew she should leave immediately, but the warmth of the fire was so inviting. She looked down at Lucy. The girl was already drifting off to sleep. "Fine," Evelyn said. "I will stay for the work and the pay. Nothing more than that." Garrett nodded his head slowly. His expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper, will show you your room." As Evelyn walked away, she felt his eyes. They burned into her back like the summer sun. The journey of 1,000 miles had led her here. She was right back where her heart began. The following days were a blur of work. The air was filled with the scent of fabric and tension. Evelyn was set up in a bright, airy sewing room. It had a clear view of the horse corrals. She spent her hours cutting silk and heavy velvet. Her sewing machine hummed a steady, lonely rhythm. Garrett was often gone before dawn. He was out on the range checking the winter herds. But in the evenings he would return. His powerful presence filled the entire house. He would sit in the dining room alone. He drank his coffee and stared at the walls. Sometimes he would find Lucy in the hallway. The girl would be playing with a carved wooden horse. Evelyn would watch them from the shadows. Her heart ached with a dull, constant throb. She saw the way Garrett's hand hovered over the girl. He wanted to reach out and touch her hair. She saw the way Lucy looked at him without fear. The child felt a natural bond she couldn't explain. It was a dangerous game they were all playing. Garrett began bringing small gifts for Lucy. He brought a porcelain doll with real hair. "I wasn't sure what little girls liked," he admitted awkwardly. "I asked Mrs. Higgins to help me choose." He brought a small bag of peppermint sticks. The gifts unsettled Evelyn more than she wanted to admit. Part of her feared that Garrett's wealth would give him a place in Lucy's life before she was ready. Yet Lucy's joy was impossible to resent. The child had never owned a toy so fine. She called the doll Lady Beth. That evening, Lucy carefully tucked the doll beneath a folded blanket before climbing into bed herself. She whispered goodnight to it as though it were a lifelong friend. Garrett watched quietly from the hallway. He realized it was the very first toy his daughter had ever loved. The thought settled heavily in his chest. He had owned fine horses, expensive rifles, and the largest ranch in the county. Yet he had not been there to buy his little girl her very first doll. It was a loss no amount of wealth could ever repair. She shared her peppermints with the stable cats. The tension in the house continued to mount. They were living under one roof with a massive secret. One afternoon, Evelyn worked on a heavy quilt. It was for the main guest room upstairs. It was a wedding ring pattern. She had actually started it years ago in St. Louis. She had never found the heart to finish it. The interlocking rings reminded her of her loss. Garrett walked into the room unexpectedly. His spurs jingled softly on the floorboards. He stood over the quilt for a long time. His eyes traced the intricate, tiny stitches. "I remember this," he said. His voice was barely a whisper in the quiet room. "You were working on it the night we met by the river." Evelyn felt a hot blush creep up her neck. Her needle paused midair. "It was just a scrap of cloth back then," she said. "No, it was a dream," Garrett corrected. He reached out and touched a patch of blue silk. His fingers accidentally grazed her own. The electricity between them was still there. It was as strong as a summer mountain storm.
"Why didn't you write to me, Evelyn? Just one letter to tell me you were safe." "Your father controlled the local post," she reminded him. She pulled her hand away quickly. "I was a girl with nothing, Garrett. I thought you had moved on to better things." "I never moved on," he said. His dark eyes burned into her soul. "I spent 3 years looking for you before I came here. I built all of this because of you. I thought maybe, one day, you would need a home." Evelyn felt hot tears stinging her eyes. She refused to let them fall in front of him. "I built my own home, Garrett. It is small and dusty, but it is mine." "And Lucy?" he asked. His voice was low and suddenly dangerous. "Is she yours alone to claim?" Evelyn stood up from her chair. Her jaw was set in a firm, hard line. "She is the daughter of a survivor," she said. "She belongs to the woman who didn't give up. That is all you need to know for now." She turned back to her sewing machine. Her heart was racing like a runaway carriage. She knew the truth was a ticking clock. One night, a fierce blizzard began to howl. The wind came screaming down from the north. The windows rattled violently in their frames. The temperature outside plummeted below zero. It was a reminder of how fragile life was here. The frontier did not care about your plans. Evelyn sat by the fire in her small room. She was rocking a coughing, shivering Lucy. The girl had developed a sudden, sharp fever. Her skin was hot and dry to the touch. Evelyn felt a familiar, sickening panic. There was a soft knock on the heavy door. Garrett entered without waiting for an answer. He was carrying a basin of cool well water. "I heard her coughing from the hall," he said. His face was etched with deep, genuine worry. He knelt by the side of the small bed. He dipped a clean cloth into the water. He began to bathe Lucy's burning forehead. His rough hands trembled ever so slightly. He had calmed frightened horses during blizzards. He had stitched wounded cowboys after cattle drives. Yet nothing had ever frightened him as much as this little girl's fever. His large hands were surprisingly gentle. "She will be all right, Evelyn," he said. His voice was steady and calm. "I have seen the men through worse than this." For the first time, Evelyn let her guard drop. She watched him care for the child. Evelyn had never confirmed that Lucy was his, but Garrett's heart had already accepted the truth. She saw the devotion in every movement. She saw the silent sacrifice of his pride. He stayed in the room all through the night. He sat in a hard wooden chair by the bed. When Lucy whimpered in her sleep, he quietly brushed a curl away from her face. He whispered an old hymn his mother used to sing. The melody was soft and almost broken. It carried memories of a small farmhouse far from Wyoming. His mother had sung those same words whenever he woke from childhood nightmares. Now he found himself singing them to the little girl sleeping before him. Lucy slowly relaxed beneath the blanket. Her breathing became steadier. For a brief moment, Garrett imagined what life might have been if 5 stolen years had never existed. He pictured teaching her to ride. He pictured carrying her on his shoulders through the spring fields. Those ordinary dreams hurt far more than any wound he had ever carried. If Garrett's quiet devotion has touched your heart, stay with us. The truth he has waited 5 years to hear is finally about to be spoken. He did not ask for any more explanations. As the sun began to shine through the frosted window, Lucy's fever finally broke. Lucy opened her eyes and looked at Garrett. A small, weak smile touched her lips. "Thank you, mister," she whispered. Garrett's eyes filled with sudden tears. He had to look away toward the window. Evelyn felt something inside her shift. It was like the ice breaking on a frozen river. "Garrett," she said softly. Her voice was thick with raw emotion. He turned to her, looking weary and hopeful. "She has your eyes," she told him. "You know that, don't you?" Garrett let out a long, shaky breath. It sounded like a breath he had been holding since the day Evelyn disappeared. "I knew the moment I saw her," he admitted. "She is the image of my mother. She has the fierce spirit of you." The peace after the storm was very short-lived. The reality of their situation began to set in. Garrett wanted to claim her immediately. "I want her to have my name," he insisted. They were sitting at the breakfast table. "I want her to inherit every acre of this ranch. I want her to never want for anything again." But Evelyn was terrified of the social cost. In 1888, the world was a judgmental place. A child born out of wedlock was a scandal. It was a social death sentence for the mother.
"They will call me names, Garrett," she said. Her voice was trembling with fear. "They will look at Lucy with pity and scorn. I will not have her shamed by the world." "I will marry you," Garrett said simply. "I have wanted to marry you since St. Louis. I have wanted it since the bakery on 4th Street. "You are only saying that for Lucy," Evelyn argued. "You could marry a governor's daughter. You shouldn't marry a penniless seamstress." Garrett slammed his hand on the oak table. The china cups rattled and jumped. "Do you really think I care about that?" he roared. "Do you think I have changed that much? I built this entire empire for you. I built it for a woman I thought was gone. Now that you are here, I will fight for the chance to earn your trust again." This led to a heated, painful argument. The words echoed through the long hallways. Evelyn felt trapped by his wealth. She felt trapped by his heavy demands. She felt like the same girl from years ago. She was the girl bullied by his father. She decided she would finish the sewing. Then she would leave the ranch forever. One evening, Garrett was away in town. Evelyn found a hidden drawer in the library desk. Inside was a thick stack of old letters. They were all addressed to her. None of them had ever been sent. She opened one with shaking fingers. She read the dates on the yellowed paper. They started weeks after she fled St. Louis.
"My dearest Evelyn," the first one read. "If you ever read this, please know one thing. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. I have found the man who drove you away. I have disowned my father forever. I have taken my mother's family name. I will find you. Even if I have to walk, I will walk across the entire continent." There were dozens of letters in the drawer. They were filled with his deep pain. They were filled with his undying hope. Evelyn realized the truth in that moment. Garrett had made his own silent sacrifices. He had given up a life of easy luxury. He had given up a massive inheritance. He did it all for the chance to find her. He moved to the frontier to be a better man. She sat on the library floor and wept. Each letter seemed to steal another piece of the anger she had carried for so many years. She realized Garrett had been mourning the same love from the opposite side of the country. Neither of them had stopped believing completely. Neither of them had truly let go. The tragedy was never a lack of love. It had always been a lack of truth. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine a future instead of merely surviving another day. The letters were scattered all around her. Just then, the heavy front door swung open. Garrett walked in, covered in fresh snow. He saw her on the floor with the letters. He froze in the doorway of the library. "You weren't supposed to see those," he said. His voice was raw and filled with shame. "Why didn't you send them?" she asked. She looked up at him through her tears. "Because I didn't know where you were," he shouted the words in frustration. "I sent hundreds of others to every lane in the country. These were the ones I wrote at night. I wrote these when I thought I was losing my mind." He walked over and knelt beside her. His face softened as he looked at her. "Evelyn, I have lived in a desert. Seeing you and Lucy is like seeing rain. It is like seeing rain for the very first time. I cannot change what my father did," he continued, "and I cannot demand that you forgive me for the years we lost. I can only promise that I will never make your choices for you. If you stay, it must be because you choose us." Evelyn reached out and touched his cheek. "I am so sorry, Garrett," she whispered. "I am sorry I didn't trust our love." He pulled her into his strong arms. For the first time in years, she felt safe. The wedding ring quilt was finally done. It was finished the night before the ball.
Every stitch was a testament to history. It was a symbol of their shared endurance. The night of the winter ball arrived. The ranch was transformed into a dream. Lanterns hung from every timber beam. The sound of fiddles filled the cold air. The most influential families in the Wyoming Territory arrived in fur coats. They came in polished black carriages. Evelyn stood in the wings of the hall. She wore a dress she had made for herself. It was a simple, elegant gown of deep red. It was the color of a winter sunset. She held Lucy's small, warm hand.
The girl looked like a princess in white lace. Garrett walked up to them slowly. He wore a formal black evening coat. He offered his arm to Evelyn with a smile. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "People will talk, Garrett," she whispered. "Let them talk," he replied firmly. He led her into the center of the ballroom. The music stopped for a sudden moment. The whispers began almost immediately. A woman near the orchestra covered her mouth in shock. One gentleman quietly muttered that the rancher had ruined his reputation. Another guest simply shook his head. The silence lasted several long seconds. But Garrett did not look at the crowd. He only had eyes for Evelyn. They began to waltz across the floor. They moved in perfect, fluid harmony. Halfway through the dance, a man approached. It was the governor of Wyoming Territory. "Thorne," the older man said politely. He scanned Evelyn and the quiet child. "I don't believe I have met this lady." Garrett stopped dancing, but didn't let go. He gripped Evelyn's hand even tighter. He made sure every ear was listening. "This is Evelyn Lane," he announced. His voice carried across the silent room. "She is the woman I intend to marry, if she will still have me. She is the mother of my daughter." He turned to Evelyn then. For the first time that evening, the powerful rancher looked uncertain. Evelyn slipped her hand into his. Her answer needed no words. A collective gasp went up from the room. But Garrett did not flinch or blink. Evelyn held her head high and proud. The governor looked at Garrett intently. He saw the fierce love in the rancher's eyes. "Well," the governor said with a smile, "she is a lucky woman, Thorne, and you are a lucky man to have them." The fiddles resumed their joyful tune. The scandal was immense, but the victory was greater. In the heart of the ranch, the story was told. Evelyn and Garrett sat by the fire later. Lucy was asleep on the finished quilt. The little girl still held Lady Beth close against her chest. The old wedding ring quilt covered both of them. Garrett smiled quietly. Years ago, the quilt had been a symbol of everything they had lost. Tonight, it had become the blanket keeping their daughter warm. Neither of them spoke for several long moments. They simply watched Lucy sleep, grateful that home was finally more than a dream. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked softly. "Now we live," Garrett replied. He kissed her forehead with tenderness. "We will raise our daughter on this land. We will never let a lie divide us again." The year 1888 was a turning point. For Evelyn and Garrett, the wind changed. It became the breath of a brand new life. It was a family restored against all odds. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your soul today, please give this video a like. We want to hear from you in the comments. Tell us which part made you most emotional. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. In the next video, we explore a legend of a hidden silver locket found in an abandoned mountain cabin. You won't want to miss that discovery.
Until then, cherish the ones you love. Good night.